Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala rasulillah. Inshallah, we're going to do a little short special lecture today, talking about refuting the left. And by the left, what we mean is like what they call the liberal. I don't want to go too deep into politics, but to kind of simplify it. And also for the need for, especially Muslim youth, not to get confused or be fall into doubts because of some of the things or many of the things that the leftists claim. So what they call social justice warriors, you're familiar with these terms, right? So this is all from like the radical left, and that's tends to be the group that has a stronger influence on Muslims. Okay, as for the right wing, what they would call conservatives, in general, they don't pose a threat to the iman of Muslims, their belief. They some of them physically threaten Muslims, indeed. But in general, do you hear young Muslims repeating the talking points of the extreme right? No, you don't hear Muslims in general. So we're going to talk about the left, inshallah. And again, this is meant to be a quick overview, very short lesson, so that just to give Muslims a framework, because what we want to focus on here is the framework as a Muslim. When I'm hearing these things coming through the social media, the mainstream media, through the classrooms, how do I frame these matters from an Islamic perspective? So let's start with, first of all, we know that a belief or an ideology has an isnad. What do we mean by isnad? What do we mean by this term isnad? A what? Chain of transmission. Okay? Our religion has a what? Isnad. If for a person who wants to acquire Islamic knowledge, then what does he need to do? Seek the people who have an isnad that goes back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This leftist ideology, does it have an isnad? Yes. It has what? A chain that you can trace. It has a historical origin. Of course, it's not from a prophet, but it has an origin. So let's go briefly, and again, not going into all the deep details, but we mentioned last week, what is basically the genesis of this leftist ideology? We said it started when? The origin. Now, this was not leftist ideology originally, but this is the seeds were planted during the 1500s with what? What'd you call it? I only hear crickets. The Protestant Revolution. And who was the guy who kicked off the revolution? Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King. Okay, Dean? The guy's name was Martin Luther. So the Protestant Revolution in the 1500s, early 1500s, what happened? That Martin Luther and others, they saw the corruption in the church, and they wanted to reform it. That's why sometimes they call it the Protestant Reformation, the Reformation movement. They wanted to reform. When we say the church, back then you meant what? The Catholic Church. Yeah, when you say the church, you mean the Catholic Church. So Europe was dominated, Western Europe was dominated by the what? By the Catholics. Okay? But then Martin Luther comes along, 1500s. He says, well, there are some problems with the church, there's corruption. So he tries to reform the church. The Catholic Church doesn't want any part of it. They kick him out, and then what does he do? He starts his own sect. Okay, so now you have Protestantism, or we can say in particular Lutheranism. And then from that you get other movements like Calvinism. And then it became what happened to the Catholic Church, where it controlled like France and Spain and a big chunk of Central Europe, England, what they call Great Britain. All of that was controlled by the Catholics. 1500s come along. These different national groups, they start to form their own churches. Okay? So you end up with, like in the 1600s with Henry VIII, 1500s. Henry VIII, he starts his own church. 1530s, if I remember correctly. So these guys, so what happened to the power of the Catholic Church? It started to what? Break up. Okay? And then, so that's 1500s, and not just did it start to break up, from the 1500s until the early 1700s, what happens for the Europeans? They're doing what?
Fighting.
They're slaughtering each other in the name of religion. And it's called the Wars of Religion. And when they speak of religion, what were these Western Europeans talking about? What religion? Christianity. Okay? Of course, they were also fighting the Muslims during this time. But when they're talking about among themselves, because the only religion that they allowed to exist really in Western Europe was what? Christianity. No, it's not like the Islamic culture you will find in Islamic, certain regions in the Islamic world. You have Christian communities that go back for hundreds and hundreds of years. So, but for the Europeans, they were very intolerant even of each other, much less the Muslims who they saw as their mortal enemies. So 1500 to 1700, you have the wars of religion. These different sects, what do we know about them? Could any one of them prove that they are right? No, why not? Because they're all on what?
They're built on falsehood.
They're all built on falsehood, period. The Protestants who revolted against the Catholics and called the Catholics kuffar, infidels, disbelievers. Where did the Protestants get their religion from?
The Catholics?
From the Catholics. So what are they saying about the roots of their religion?
It's wrong.
They're saying we got them from people who are not what? Trustworthy, who are deviant, who are not trustworthy. So it's a big, Ahmed, it's a giant mess. So after this period, or what was one of the results of this period? What did the Europeans start to say? The Euros, meaning Europeans. And we say Europeans here, we mean the Western European kuffar. We don't mean the Muslims, for example, of Eastern Europe. The Europeans, what became their ethos? What was their attitude towards religion? They said,
They wanted to split it from the state.
what's that?
They wanted to split it from the state.
Yeah. And so they said what? In essence, we have to what? Agree to disagree. Meaning, we're going to keep killing ourselves indefinitely. Because how can any of these groups prove themselves right? They can't. We're gonna keep killing ourselves. It's going to cause destruction and all. Okay, so what we're going to, as you said, we're going to make religion less significant in our lives. Prior to that, we said the Catholic Church and the royal class, they controlled everything in Europe, basically. So, but with the Protestant revolutions, and you have all these different Christian sects and new sects popping up and new subsects of this sect, and okay, we're going to have to agree to disagree. And then they put religion, so to speak, it becomes less central in their lives. This is in the beginning, in particular, 1700s. Also in this time, what is going on? You have colonialism, right? Meaning that the Europeans are going to these different parts of the world, they're taking over these territories, and what does that lead to? Well, what does that do for Europe? They become phenomenally wealthy, right? So now you have a new class, what they call mercantile class, meaning the people from business and trade, not just business and trade itself. You end up now with what development like stocks. You end up with insurance. So now they're going into what? Riba. Because in the old system, in the Catholic system, usury was considered a horrendous sin, which it is religiously, a horrendous sin. But then that class of people who are just they're gaining power, influence through what? Money. So this is the mercantilism, and what came after that? The colonial era. Also, what happened with all those natural resources that they got from their different colonies, whether it was in India, the Americas, for example, in the Caribbean, and other places, South America, all these places that they were taking over. That also the Europeans, they started making advancements because of what happened a little in the 1600s. You had what they call the era of enlightenment, and that led to them focusing on the development of what? Science and technology. And with the science and technology came what? Related to the mercantilism, you have the what? Industrial revolution. Okay, and what does this mean? When you have people who are concerned about making money, as a rule, do those people tend to be the most religious in the society? No. And also, they want what? Power. But still, in European society, 1500s, 1600s, the church, still, whether the Catholic Church or the Protestant churches, they had a central role in the society as well as the kings and the queens. But these people who are getting powerful through money, do you think they like kings and queens and having the church tell them what to do? No, so they are pushing to what? To lessen the power of the church, or of religion, we should say. And then what happened in the 1700s, the end of the 1700s? What happened in the late 1700s?
The Renaissance?
No, that was way before. Lady Sumaya gave us the dates. The French Revolution. And this revolution was, by name, anti-religious. This was they were open about it. Meaning anti-Christian, anti-Catholic in particular. Because France had been a Catholic, predominantly Catholic country, although the Catholics and the Protestants had been killing each other. But it was ruled, the Catholic Church had the power, had significant power in France up until the Revolution. And then during the Revolution, they closed churches. We mentioned one of the lessons, they even came up with their own Temple of Reason, where they tried to get rid of religion altogether, literally tried to get rid of religion. They slaughtered a lot of their clergy, meaning their priests and the people like that, the bishops and stuff like that. So this happened in the late 1700s. This was really the spread, the hard spread of atheism in European society. Prior to the French Revolution, at least some places in Europe, it was illegal to be an atheist. It was illegal. So with the French Revolution, and again, people are seeing all this bloodshed. So this is the 1700s, say to the 1800s. And then also because of the Industrial Revolution, all of this happened, again, studying their background. What's happening? You have that mercantile class, the business class, they're getting rich. You have these people building these factories. And then what happens? You have a giant what? Class gap. What do we mean by that? What do we mean by that? You had the people who were involved, who were running factories, 1800s. What is the working situation of the people in those factories?
Low class.
They're poor, they're low class. What's the work? Is it easy work? Do they work work like 6 hours a day, and then they're working them typically 6 days a week. Usually they get Sunday off, maybe. They work 6 days a week. They're working 8-hour shifts, 12, 14-hour shifts or longer, under very horrible circumstances. And the rich are getting what? Richer, and the poor people are living in crushing urban poverty. Not poverty like living in the countryside, urban poverty, which has usually typically worse than country poverty, rural poverty. So who comes along and says, well, this is wrong and we need to fix it? Mid-1800s. What is the ideology that comes on the scene to say that we need to fix this class gap, the gap between the rich and the poor? I heard it.
Communism?
No, the guy who started it. I don't know if, maybe that is. Karl Marx. No. Yeah, he did. I guess he did call it communism. But it didn't take form in his lifetime. Okay? So you have Karl Marx, mid to late 1800s. He's seeing, now we're not talking about whether he was sincere in this or whatever. We're talking about his analysis, okay? That he sees that you have these people living in crushing poverty. And then you have these guys who own the factories and they're just getting what? Phenomenally rich. No. So what does Karl Marx call for? What's his da'wah to? What's his da'wah? Da'wah meaning call. We don't mean Islamic da'wah. Da'wah, everybody clear when I'm using this term? Da'wah. What's he calling the people to? Only one person. I want one of the students to say. What's he calling the people to?
Revolution.
Revolution. Nah, how are you going to get the money from the rich people?
Take it. Stop working.
They did partly by strikes. Okay, they advocated strikes, but ultimately, what is their goal? His ideology is a call for revolution. Who's revolting against whom? Who's revolting against whom?
Poor against the rich.
The poor against the rich, in particular in Europe, right? So you're talking about the poor Europeans revolting against the rich Europeans. Got it? So this is in the 1800s, up until the 1900s. What comes along in the early 1900s, first quarter of the 1900s? What comes along 1914, 1918?
World War.
World War, first one, right? Right? World War One. Now, for the Marxists, if you study Marxism back in the day when I was in college, it was big, yeah, Mark. The whole thing with Marxism was like because it's still the communists had just died, the states. But people would teach it. The Marxists talk about Marxism like it's a religion. Like they'll say this history has to go through these phases, and when this occurs, then we must get this next stage. So what they thought was going to happen is that the different poor people from the different countries, on the German side, the Axis side, if you wish, the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, those poor people would unite with the poor people from England and from France and Belgium, and the poor would unite and overthrow the rich. Did that happen? No. What happened? The people gave loyalty to their country over their class. You follow? Because in Marxist theory, all the poor, and it's not wrong if you think about it logically. The poor people, they have more in common with each other than super rich people. Just because they speak the same language, you have something in common with them. You follow, Ahmed? In that sense. Now, religiously, we're not talking. There are issues. We're not talking about it from a religious point of view. But World War I was supposed to bring about the unity of the working people all over Europe against their governments. It did not happen. People chose to be loyal to their countries and fight poor people basically in the war. Who's fighting? Poor people against whom? Poor people. And the poor slaughtered the poor because in the name of what? Nationalism. You got it? So what happened? But it did happen. Revolution did occur where? In World War I, during that period.
Russia.
It happened in Russia. And that's where you get the first communist country. So Russia, we're not going to talk about it. Okay, but why did it happen in Russia? In general, what people typically say is that the working class in the Western countries, there was still a chance that you could move up in the society. And it wouldn't be outside of the war period. It's not worth yourself getting killed when you can possibly become middle class. You got it? In Russia, the people, the masses were what they call them, serfs, right? They lived basically like slaves. I mean, you're talking really, you said urban poverty. They were rural poverty, but like crushed like slaves. So they rose up in revolution because basically they had nothing to lose. Okay? But in the Western Europe, they did not get this revolution to happen. So then what happened? Those Marxists, they had to go back to the drawing board. Everybody got it? Think. I'm going to erase this. Let me take a picture of it, inshallah. Think for a moment. Who was going to rise up and revolt during the revolution in this first model? Who was going to rise up and revolt in theory, according to Marx?
Poor people.
The poor people. What poor people? You're right. But let's add a little bit so it will be clear about the next group. Which poor people? The poor Indians in India who were being crushed by the British colonial powers? What?
European.
The Europeans, yeah. So the idea was that the Europeans themselves, the poor Europeans, would revolt against the wealthy Europeans. It did not happen. We're doing the history very quickly just to give a background. Okay. So we're now into the 20th century. these Marxists could not get the working class people, the poor people, meaning Europeans, to rise up and revolt against their governments. So who did the Marxists start to tap, to recruit, to rise up, to agitate, to be potential revolutionaries in different societies, especially here in America? Especially here in America.
Minorities.
The minority groups. Nah. And in our time, we see it very, very, very clearly with BLM, right? Yeah, very clearly. So they started to, one was the ethnic minorities, ethnic racial minorities, and women. So they recruited them to agitate to what? We need change, we need to alter the society. As you, right now, isn't exactly what you hear right now? So they recruited these people because really, is their goal to make equality? No. Their goal is to make fitna. You follow, guys? Their goal is, you see, BLM, what is rioting and looting about? Is that going to bring equality? It brings what?
Chaos.
Chaos. No. So that was this is what's going on now, guys. So we're mentioning the history because when these people talk about the left and they're saying that we want equality, we are for tolerance and all of this type of stuff, in reality, they're just talking. They're saying certain things that they know will appeal to their audience, but they don't mean it. So that's the background. So that's where we are now. Islamically, all of this, when any case comes up, an issue comes up, always you ask yourself, what's the judgment in the religion? Okay, before you start repeating things that these people are saying, like when they say tolerance. Do they really believe in tolerance? No. Look at all the people that they try to, what do they call it, get them canceled. If you believe in tolerance, then you would accept what? Everybody. The ones who claim to be tolerant, do they accept everyone? No. And for us as Muslims, do we accept everyone and everything? No. We have a standard. Oh, how much time on the card?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, stop it now, and then we'll do a part 2. Inshallah. Is this clear for you, everybody?